BB for OD and straight black pride, brothers and sisters. Says your brother, DC Radical One, and you have entered the center. Shout out to our wonderful producer, Cindy Ashby. You can check us out on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and now iHeartRadio at On the Wake Up Radio. More important than all of that, you can check us out at onthewakeupradio.com. That's onthewakeupradio.com. Also, you can check us out at otwtube.com. That's otwtube.com. The videos that get censored from YouTube, the videos that get taken down, the videos that cause controversy, end up at otwtube.com. And you can find me there, of course, as DC Radical One. If you'd like to email me, you can email me at dc.radical_1 at protonmail.com, excuse me. And also you can follow me on Instagram at dc.radical1 and Twitter at dc_radical_ONE. And if you would like to donate via the Cash App is $DC Radical 1. So let's see what we got in the building. And I'd like to apologize for the time mix up. I didn't realize that I had set the time for 8:10. Well, I had announced the show would be on at 8 o'clock. Y'all know I always try to start on the hour with the 5-minute countdown to give myself and you all time to get set. Slight mix up. So BB for OD, straight black pride, the sister Vanessa, BB for OD to a BB for OD, man. BB for ODA and straight black pride, the spirit, mind, character, soul. BB for ODA to I Allen, BB for ODA to brother Elijah, BB for ODA to brother you got ripped off, who is the leader of what I'm now going to call the wrench mob, for the moderators. BB for ODA to brother Crow, and straight black pride to I think that's Danielle Davis. If I'm mispronouncing that, you have my apologies. And greetings to Smoochies 420. Apologize for my phone making unnecessary noise. I don't know why it's not. All those notifications aren't turned off, but they are now. Something I forgot to do starting off. So today is something that I wanted to do. Peace to Brother Dawood. It's something that I wanted to talk about. And I've actually been wanting to talk about this document and the ramifications of it for a long time. But I saw so many people, on YouTube, so many people discuss the whole black male female dynamic. They discuss it, in my opinion, ahistorically. They discuss it in a non-constructive manner. And they discuss it in a way that makes me tired. I looked at the stuff to see if anybody was doing what I would do. I haven't seen anybody doing it, and if they are, then I'm grateful for that. But once again, I'm answering the ancestral call to put things in a perspective that very few people will see them. But before we get to that, on our screen we have, because I do not have the official flyer ready, so I have the information in a basic format that everybody can easily see and understand. On your screen, this is will be the 6th annual Dr. Chancellor Williams Day celebration. We're splitting up the celebration into 2 different days. This was my decision. We have previously done 2 days, but not this far apart. Dr. Chancellor Williams' actual born day is December 22nd. So I wanted to do the gravesite ceremony closer to his birthday. So we're going to have the gravesite ceremony on Saturday, December 24th, 2022, at high noon to take advantage of a little bit of light and heat that we have. That will be at Lincoln Memorial Cemetery. The address is 4001 Suitland Road, Suitland, Maryland, Section O, Lot 618, Grave 5. When you go to the cemetery, there's like a big brick house and a gate at the front. You drive to the left, there's a parking area. We gather there, and then we proceed up the hill towards the gravesite. The gravesite ceremony usually lasts about an hour. Usually, myself and Brother Genie, we lead the gravesite ceremony. And I think somewhere on my YouTube, I mean, not on my YouTube, but on my Instagram page, we have previous ones probably still up. I've never taken them down. It's possible Instagram is taking them down. So that will be on the 24th. That's the gravesite ceremony. And then on the 31st, we will have the Africa versus Everybody lecture, which has become an annual lecture that I do. The lecture gets changed up every year to be more current with the times. Some of you have seen that lecture. This lecture will be live streamed. Right now, we're looking at doing Eventbrite for the tickets. If anything changes with that, I'll let you all know. That will be at the Empowerment Center on December 31st, 2022, 2 p.m. at 6490 Landover Road, Cheverly, Maryland, 20785. This is actually, in reality, Africa versus Everybody, Part 1. Part 2 will be Dr. Khalid Muhammad Day. And Dr. Khalid Muhammad Day will actually be, this year will be 2 weeks after the Chancellor Williams Day. Hold up, let me do. I think that's on, I didn't think about it, but I think that's on Black Love Day. I didn't think about that. Hold on, let me verify that real quick. No, it's not. My bad, because I'm thinking. And the reason I'm pausing because I hear firearms being discharged. No, it's actually will be January 14th. Will be Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad Day. So again, this is the 6th annual Dr. Chancellor Williams Day celebration, which will be split up into the gravesite ceremony on December 24th at noon, and then the Africa versus Everybody lecture on December 31st at 2 p.m., which will give you plenty of time. We'll be finishing plenty of time for you to celebrate the incoming new year and, enjoy your liquid refreshments and whatever other activities you intend to indulge in that night. And Sister Spirit Mind Character Soul said her solar return. Which day, sister? The 24th or the 31st? And also, are you coming up here for that? If so, I might give you one free ticket. So that is that information. I just wanted to share that with everyone. So back to the January 14th. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Dr. Khalid Muhammad Day celebration. Okay. So let's get into this discussion real quick. So, like I said, it's a subject that I really didn't want to talk about too much because everyone has talked about it. I like to do it usually when we have these discussions. I like to do it in a format where we have a panel discussion. I've done those before. I haven't done one of those in a while. I probably will have another one maybe February with brothers and sisters. As I get ready for this upcoming lectures and everything. I don't think I'm gonna do one before that. But when I hear people have these discussions, and at first I'm like, yeah, this is necessary. There is a rift. We are having problems in the community. We don't seem to be able to communicate. But after a while, you realize that the discussions aren't held um, to solve problems, and they're not done in a way that are, I think, genuine. I think they're done for more at this point, more for entertainment value. They're done for clicks and likes. I've never been one of those people. I guess, things change if you get monetized. By the way, thank you all for the number of subscribers and everything that we have. Our subscriber count has gone up probably 50. I think we got like over 50 new subscribers this month. Brother, you got ripped off said that I feel it, bro. Now, actually, I was not going to do it because I saw brother Omawale Africa doing it. So literally I saw him doing it. I was like, okay, he has that covered. But this is, to be completely honest, I thought about doing this almost 2 months ago. And then I was like, I don't really want to do this. I just, you see it every day on YouTube. And you see these panels and you see this contentious discussion. It's like, and then I saw he was doing something. And I was like, oh, okay, he's doing it, cool. But I actually didn't watch a lot of his stuff. I watched like one part of one show. And then I was like, maybe I should. And now here we are. But the main thing I wanted to talk about is a document that came out in, I believe, 1969, written by noted CIA operative Gloria Steinem. And the reason that I think that this is important is because, one, because Gloria Steinem was a CIA operative. Two, Gloria Steinem is the major figure in the feminist movement. Three, Gloria Steinem is a hat. Four, when you read the article, you see the relevance of all of these things, right? So I want to go through the document, dissect it, break it down for what it is, what it says it is, and then what I interpret it as. And then we will discuss it from there. And this should only take maybe about an hour or so, because we're back to our regular audience. We had Brother Genie here, had a boatload of people here. Now, and I just put the notifications in the different chats and things like that. So I'm gonna bring this up. Right now, this title says, "After Black Power, Women's Liberation." So let me know if y'all can see that, and I'm going to read it. But the first thing I want y'all to notice is the date. This is from the New Yorker magazine, and the date is April 4th, 1969. And I did discuss this briefly when I was on Brother Genie's show on Sankofa Revolutionary Radio. I discussed this document, but I didn't go into detail because I didn't have the document in front of me, and the brother was interviewing me, so we went on beyond that. And the brother says, "Does the gender war potentially lead our people to homosexuality?" The brother didn't even let me get a chance to even get started. In short, Yes. I'll give you a prime example, brother. Here's a prime example. You will see, especially in the quote unquote hood, there are times where you'll see a sister with 3 children, right? She has obviously engaged in heterosexual activity. The evidence is there. And then you'll see her with another woman who is obviously identifying in some way, shape, or form as a man. And these two people are together. Now, one of these people obviously identifies as a woman and has done the activities to produce a child with a man. But then when you see her with the 3 children, she's with a woman who is acting in the role of a man. Since I've seen that before more than once, that is the answer to your question. The disappointment in those previous relationships leads women at times, especially from the younger generation, to then think, oh, if I can't get it right with men, maybe I'll try with women. So that answers your question. And Spirit, Mind, Character, Soul says trauma bonding, right? Because many times the sister who does not want to be a woman has suffered from some type of sexual abuse, some sexual trauma. The other woman that wants to be a woman has suffered from some type of relationship trauma and or sexual abuse. It's like it could be both. So you're bonding out of a dynamic of hurt, pain, trauma, abuse, so forth, so on. Right. So we see that in our community. But so hopefully that answers your question. So back to the document at hand. The first thing I want us to look at is the title and the date. It says after Black Power, Women's Liberation from April 4th, 1969. I want someone to tell me the significance of the April 4th date and the 1969 year, because it is very, for this to be released at that time, I believe this is very, very much symbolic. One thing we have to understand about the hats, they understand the significance of certain dates and times, and this understand the significance of symbolism. So this title and this date of the article go hand in hand. And I understand there's I believe about a 10-second delay, but if anybody have a guess, I'll give you all a few seconds to figure out the significance of the title and the date of the article. And Brother Dawood said MLK assassination. That is correct. The MLK assassination, excuse me, was 1 year before this article. So this article is written exactly to the day, 1 year later to the day. And it declares after Black Power. But let's take a look at really when the Black Power movement kind of really started. We understand Malcolm X was assassinated in February of 1965. Right? Then the next significant thing that happened was the emergence of the Black Panther Party in October of 1966. This was in reality the full manifestation, right, of the Black Power movement. Even though brother Stokely Carmichael and Barbara Mukasa Ricks had been given the cry of Black Power before 1960, or before the Panthers formed. The Panthers were the physical manifestation of the cry of Black Power, right? Now, this woman is saying 2.5 years later, all right, enough of that Black Power stuff. Let's get to this women's liberation. But here is the thing. Why would she attack Black Power? What's the benefit for her? Well, we have to look at, she's a hat. And when we talked to Brother Genie either last week or 2 weeks ago, what did we talk about? We talked about the fact that the hats were very much influential in the opposite of the Black Power movement, which is the civil rights movement. In the same way that the hats were very influential, it started the NAACP, which would go on to oppose what? The Garvey movement. You see what I'm saying? So every time there's a movement for liberation for Black people that's independent, there's a countervailing force that's hat controlled to keep us from being independent. When you look throughout the 20th century, you can always see that counterbalance of Black people wanting to be free and the hats propping up some Black people for us not to be free, right? This is a case of this, but they're using a different tactic. But instead of coming with a full-on movement to go full force against the Black liberation movement, they're using the divide and conquer strategy and targeting the women. Now, this was going on before this article. Sister, it's been going on for a long time. But if you Jenny talked to Mama Mabel Williams, and she talked about it with them trying to divide the brothers and sisters. I'm trying to think who else. Fannie Lou Hamer, she talked about it, right? And so the sisters that were in, because remember, Robert Williams and Mama Mabel Williams were part of the NAACP in Monroe, North Carolina, before he just went his own separate way with it, in essence, really his own movement, right? So these people who were part of that, they were around the hats, right? And the hat women were trying to influence them with this type of ideology, right? But they were considered the older generation. So this document is a declaration to the younger generation of women that were coming up. And we had to understand, like, the Panther sisters were teenagers in their young 20s, and the sisters that were involved in the Black Power movement at that time were younger sisters. Asada Shakur, Feeney Shakur, what's the sister's name? She was older. She was in her 20s, but in her late 20s, early 30s. But most of the sisters connected to that Black Power movement were college age and sometimes younger, right? So this document really was directed at them. Here's what's interesting. It is my contention that we haven't really had a strong support system for any form of Black power or Black liberation or anything like that, any type of Black militancy from the sisters since this declaration by Small Hat Steinem, right? Gloria Steinem. So with that set up, we're going to read from the article. All right. So I find it on my screen. Now, I'm not going to read the whole article, but I'm going to read enough, and then we're going to stop and analyze what she's saying. So it says, once upon a time, say 10 or even 5 years ago. A liberated woman was somebody who had sex before marriage and a job afterwards. Once upon a time, a liberated zone was any foreign place lucky enough to have an American army in it. Both ideas seem antiquated now, and for pretty much the same reason. Liberation isn't exposure to the American values of mom and apple pie anymore, not even if mom is allowed to work in an office and vote once in a while. It's the escape from them. For instance, right? Now, let's stop right there. Now, here's something that isn't talked about enough, at least to me, is this concept that white women talk about, and really it's hats, of black women, of women being able to work outside the home and all this stuff, right? Which was the basis of this phase of the feminist movement at that time. Here's what's never talked about now in those discussions when I hear younger women now, 50 years later, with these same talking points, black women were working at this time, right? Black women were working and black men were working. And I'll give you an example. When I was a child, my grandmother was working. When I talked to my grandmother about what she did before I was born, my grandfather, he was a plumber. My grandmother, she worked. She was a domestic, right? Her mother worked and her father worked. You see what I'm saying? So this concept of there being a choice for black women between being a stay-at-home mother or working and having a career, many times in those same 50s and 40s and 60s, our grandmothers and great grandmothers worked outside the home and took care of the home at the same time, because that's what they had to do. But the difference is we had a community. So maybe the aunt, the sister is working, maybe they take care of the children, or maybe the grandmother takes care of the children, or things like that. But that idea and concept is outside, or was outside, of the reality that of a lot of European women, right? So European women were trying to liberate themselves from something that black women weren't experiencing, because black women's problem wasn't quote unquote sexism. Black women's problem was whites. The same problem that black men had and black children had. Our problem was white people. That's it. I'm not even going to talk about the racism. Our problem was that white people existed. When white people started existing, we started having problems. And that goes back thousands of years, right? That goes back to ancient Kemet. When we saw them and they came and started living amongst us, it was a problem from that point forward, right? Plain and simple. That's just documented fact. Destruction of black civilization lays that out completely. We don't have to argue or debate that point, right? So, but this article and the entire feminist ideology makes a completely different argument. And the more that argument started to be accepted by the sisters, the bigger the conflict started to be. And then there were other things that would happen after that, right? That would cause conflict. But this is the beginning centerpiece of the modern conflict between black men and black women. And where it starts is with attacking the black power movement by removing the support system, which is the black woman. right? You can't have any major movement for liberation or black progress without black women. Period. End of discussion. Anybody who tries to tell you anything different hasn't studied our history for the last 5,000 years, right? No group of people know our history better than the hats, because they have received the culture from the people who came amongst us and lived amongst us the longest as a group, the Hyksos in ancient Kemet. They lived amongst us. They saw how we lived. They saw our culture. They saw our teachings. They took the parts that they could use, adapted it to their culture. And when we kicked them out, they took that with them and formed their religious doctrines and things like that, right? That's before the Greeks. That's literally 1,000 years before the Greeks, but nobody ever talks about that history, right? So they took that, they made up their religious doctrine, passed it on to different groups of people, and it's arrived in its current form, right? As a Torah and the Talmud that they taken and manipulated, and then slapped the chosen people label on themselves and used it to destroy the minds of black people and rule over most of the people on planet Earth with the chosen myth concept, right? That the hats use whenever somebody tries to attack them. Hey, we the chosen people, back up off us. They use it. What they use two things: what the chosen people and the Holocaust. Now, black people's Holocaust is greater than everybody's combined, but it doesn't work for us the way it works for them, right? So let's get back to the article. Now it says that Bernard girls move quietly, unlasciviously into the men's dorm at Columbia. A student sleep in to protest the absence of rational communities, quote unquote, co-ed dorms like those already springing up at other universities. Wives and mothers march around the Hudson Street alimony jail with posters announcing that they don't want alimony, which is interesting. Says a coven of 13 members of the Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell, celebrating witches and gypsies as the first women resistance fighters, demonstrates against the bastion of white male supremacy, Wall Street. The next day, the market falls 5 points. More witches and some black veiled brides invade the bridal fair at Madison Square Garden. They carry signs: confront the horror makers, here comes the bride. Sing, shout, release white mice in the audience of would-be brides, and generally scare the living daylights out of exhibitors who are trying to market the conventional delights of bridal gowns, kitchen appliances, package deal honeymoon trips, and heart-shaped swimming pools. Let's stop right there. The reason that part is important is because one of the first things that she talks about these hat women attacking is what? The institution of marriage. The quickest way to bring about the downfall of a society is to attack what? The family, and the family is built around the institution of marriage. So she's celebrating this, right? She's celebrating what? One of the first things she mentioned, the cohabitation of men and women in college. We're all adults here, right? When you start cohabitating 18 to 22-year-olds, I don't care what century you're in, what time you're in, we know what's going to take place. Everybody's hormones are raging. The boy's testosterone is at its highest. The women's curiosity is at its highest. So she's celebrating that, but denigrating the concept of marriage at the same time in this article. So this just goes to show, when you look at it and you break it down, it's really a celebration of the destruction of marriage, and eventually, of course, what follows that is the destruction of family, which, to taken to its logical conclusion, is the collapse of society, right? This is what she's celebrating in this article. We're seeing the effects of it in America. It just so happens that Black people are always the canary in the coal mine. So Black people fall victim to this stuff first, but eventually the rest of the society follows. And that's why we got now what we got. We got men going their own way, passport bros, and all this other stuff on the men's side, and the rampant feminism, lesbianism, and horror culture on the women's side. But this is where it starts in a modern context, right? All right. Let's look at it again. She says, at the end of the Columbia strike, the student-run Liberation School offers a course on women as an oppressed class. On who as an oppressed class? On women as an oppressed class. Why is this important? As the civil rights movement moves along and legislation starts being passed, what did we see? Now, remember, the movement started because Black people were being oppressed. Black people were tired of being oppressed. Black people took various means, including fighting for legislation, but also fighting with arms, right? And the civil rights people used the threat of the Black Power people to get legislation passed, which is often overlooked, right? And so the gains of the civil rights movement should have gone to Black people. But here we see the beginning of the gains being stolen by white women by classifying white women as an oppressed class. So when all the civil rights gains are being passed, right, the women are included. When you start having these quote unquote minority set asides that they used to talk about back in the day, white women were getting that stuff. We start seeing these different vouchers to go to school and all that stuff that came along with the civil rights movement. When they started doing the quotas as far as hiring, their own women picked up those jobs as well. So eventually what you would see is that they would go for the 2-for-1 deal. We'll hire the Black woman and we'll check off the Black part and we'll check off the woman part. And then now we've filled our quota of hiring quote unquote minorities, right? But at the same time, they're shutting down the factories in the 80s and beginning the exporting of jobs over to Asia, which again, that's under Reagan, but it's under the auspices of the hats, because the hats are the one that are starting things like the Trilateral Commission, right? Which builds the bond between Asia, America, and Europe to begin the exporting of jobs and bringing back the finished goods to America while sending the jobs to China and Japan. You see what I'm saying? So we don't look at the interconnectedness of these two things happening at the same time because we aren't taught to study the Trilateral Commission. We aren't taught to look at Gloria Steinem's declaration and see these things within the context of it all being hat related. The hats are the interlocking chain, to tie these things together, right? These societal changes that are taking place as we're fighting for liberation. All right, let's move forward. She said discussions include the parallel myths about women and Negroes, right? That both have smaller brains than white men, childlike natures, natural goodness, limited rationality, supportive roles to white men. Now, she says the paternalistic family system as prototype for capitalist society is discussed. The conclusion that society can't be restructured until the relationship between the sexes is restructured. But she goes into who the two of the people that she quotes when she talks about the paternalistic family system. She quotes Marx, who's a small hat, and I believe Engels is also a small hat. So this whole discussion of changing the current societal structure and changing the relationships between men and women is a complete small hat operation based upon her own talking points of this article, right? And what's being put forth as revolutionary theory for women, right? She says men are kept out of this class, but it's bigger and lasts longer than any other at the school. So all of this discussion is going on by white women, small hats, and some black women that they bring into it. And the men, including the black men, are kept out of the class, so they don't even see what's going on. Right? Then she talks about another group, Red Stockings, an action group in the women's liberation movement, sponsors a one-act play about abortion by the New Feminist Theater, whose purpose is to point out how many plays are anti-woman and how tough it is for women playwrights, directors, producers. Plus 2 hours of personal and detailed testimony in public by girls who have had abortions and tell it like it is, from through humor through sadism, right? And she says nobody wants to reform the abortion laws, they want to repeal them completely. And we see that abortion battle still going on to this day. Now, she talked about changing the dynamic between men and women, and then we get to the advocacy of abortion. So we talked about the destruction of the family, having men and women cohabitating at the age where men's hormones are the highest, and now the advocacy of abortion. Literally, she's laying out the framework for the society that we have now, and no one ever talks about this article, right? We haven't even gotten to the black part yet, really. Now she says, what do women want? The above events are in no way connected to the Bloomingdale Center. Ask not what I can do for myself, as what my husband can do for me. Ladies of Manhattan, who are said to be sociologists, or said by sociologists to be liberated, nor do the housebound matriarchs of Queens and the Bronx get much satisfaction out of reading about feminist escapades. On the contrary, the whole thing alienates them by being A, radical, and B, young. So again, she's saying that this movement is centered on young people. What are we seeing nowadays? What related movement are we seeing nowadays that's centered on young people? Anybody? Hold up. Is Brother Dawood? Yeah, Brother Dawood basically talking about right there. The homosexuality is centered on young people. Before that, what we're seeing here is what we saw being played out there decades ago. So when they want to change the societal structure, they don't bother with the people, with the adults. They take and beam the message to the children or the young people the best that they can. Sister Farnessa says that is so true. They even portray, even portrayed that in Good Times when Florida was given the department store job over James. HR said that they were getting 2-for-1 hiring Florida. I forgot about that. You're right, sister. Hold up. Let me put that up on the screen. Can I put that up on the screen? Hold on. See, can I put that up on the screen? Right. There we go. I forgot that. But yeah. And I mean, this is documented fact, but I had forgot that they actually put that in the TV show Good Times that we have all seen. And that was I'm not sure what year it was. I can't remember when Good Times started, but it was in the 70s. I know that. So this wasn't portrayed long after this article, right? So let's go back to the article. She says the women behind it and influenced by it, usually turn out to be white, serious, well-educated girls, the same sort who have labored hard in what is loosely known as, quote unquote, the movement. From the Southern sit-ins of 9 years ago to the current attacks on military-industrial educational complex, they have been jailed, beaten, maced side by side with their social activist male counterparts. It's wonderful to see how quickly police from Selma to Chicago get over their reluctance to hit women. They have marched on Senate committees, Pentagon hawks, their own college presidents, and the Chase Manhattan Bank. But once back in the bosom of SDS, they found themselves typing and making coffee. Now, she said they usually turn out to be white, serious, and well-educated. Who were the women, the white women, who would be white and well-educated and serious at that time? These are females. A lot of the females in the civil rights movement, white females that you saw, a lot of them were hats. They were coming up from the north. They were coming from places like New York and Boston and places like that, and going down to the south for the freedom rides and all that stuff. But we just looked at them as those white people in the civil rights movement. But a lot of times they were hats. Then she says, when it comes to decision making or being taken seriously in meetings, say one revolutionary theorist from Berkeley, we might as well join the young Republicans. So now she's talking about their dissatisfaction with their role in the movement, even though the hat men are the ones secretly funded and controlling the movement. But she's saying that the women don't have enough power. But instead of taking that issue up with the hat male, she's going to give what she thinks is the solution. All right. Says such grumbling noises were being made aloud at movement meetings as early as 5 years ago. But women were ridiculed or argued down by men, as well as some Uncle Tom women. Eventually, they were assured the woman question would come up on the list of radical priorities, as decided on by radical men. Meanwhile, more backstage work, more mimeography, more secondary role playing around the revolutionary cells and apartment communities. And to be honest, more reluctance to leave the secondary role and lose male approval. Now, here's the thing, right? As she talks about this and talks about the movement, Black men who were at the forefront of these movements were getting not just beaten, shot, lynched, sexually violated. If you read Negroes with Guns and you read Robert F. Williams' rebuttal to Martin Luther King, who criticized him for what he did, that's one of the things that Robert F. Williams talked about was the danger of being in the South and voluntarily getting arrested, because the beatings were one thing, but he talked about the sexual violation of the men. All right. So this is what's going on. This is what people are risking. They're risking their lives. They're risking their health and sanity. And many times the men are taking the forefront to protect the women, right? Because regardless of what she's saying, the type of brutality that the black people are suffering and the type of brutality that the white people are suffering are largely not the same. Yeah, you get a few white people to get some of the same beating, but not the type of stuff that black people get. Unless you just happen to be with the brothers when they like, oh, well, we gonna kill him, but since you looking, we got to kill you too, right? Like the two hats and the brother that they always bring up whenever they want to shame black people for exposing the hats, right? It's plain and simple. So now she says, finally, women begin to rap. And she says, talk, analyze, and radicalese. That's not radicalese. That's a black people, black cultural term that goes back really before the civil rights movement, before the Black Power movement, right? That the young people of that time started. And she says that women begin to rap about essential second classness, forming women's caucuses inside the movement in the same way that Black Power groups had done. So, I mean, she right there, she's saying, we looked at the Black Power movement, we studied it, and we're going to clone it and then use it to bring the women away from the Black Power movement. It's right here, right? She says, and once together, they made a lot of discoveries. Who's they? The white women and the hat women. That they shared more problems with women of different classes, for instance, than they did with men of their own. When you start agreeing with other women and against your men, that eventually will lead to what? Lesbianism. Now, she says that they liked and respected each other. If women don't want to work with women as Negroes used to reject other Negroes, it's usually because they believe the myth in their own inferiority, she says. And that as black militants kept explaining to white liberals, you don't get radicalized fighting other people's battles. Right? She says at the SDS convention in 1967, women were still saying such integrationist things as the struggle for the liberation of women must be a part of the larger fight for freedom. Look how she characterizes that, right? She characterizes this. She's using the same language that Malcolm X would use to attack or analyze the civil rights movement and say, hey, doing something for ourselves is better than integrating into their society. Let's separate and do something for ourselves. And she's using this same language to push an agenda to get women to separate from men. I mean, this is why you had to read this stuff. She says, but members of groups like the Southern Student Organizing Committee and New York Radical Women, a loose coalition of various radical groups whose representatives meet once a month, withdrew to start concentrating on their own problems. She says they couldn't become black or risk jail by burning their draft cards, but they could change society from the bottom up by radicalizing, and she says engaging with basic truth, the consciousness of women by going into the streets on such women's issues as abortion, free childcare centers, and a final break with the 19th century definition of females as sex objects whose main function was service to men and their children. Right? Let's think about this. Number one, that definition of women is not a universal definition. That's a Western cultural concept of women. Black people 5,000 years ago, when you had female Kemetic rulers, there were women. You understand what I'm saying? Women didn't have that issue. With Queen Santewa and the various queens throughout African society for the last 5,000-6,000 years, this wasn't an issue. This is not a black issue, but we've fallen into the trap. And Brother Magazine says, how ironic for them to say from the bottom up. Only black people have the bottom up mindset. These jokers start at the top and remain there. But see, her point is, if she's going to start at the bottom up, if you want to exploit the people, who's at the bottom? She's talking about utilizing black people as cannon fodder for their movement, or in this case, black women, which again would separate black women from black men. And also they started, like I said before, with the young people. Brother Dawood says, ironically, that no one cared about the violence against those in the civil rights movement until a hat was murdered in Mississippi in 1964. Right. Exactly, brother. All right, let's get back to this article. All of this happened not so much by organization as by contagion. What has come to be known in the last 2 years or so as the Women's Liberation Movement, WLM, is no more pin downable than the Black Power movement, excuse me. Maybe less so because white groups tend to be less structured, more skittish about leadership than black ones. Nonetheless, when the WLM had its first national convention last fall, women from 20 states and Canada showed up on a month's notice. A newsletter, Voice of the Women's Liberation Movement, is published in Chicago. WLM-minded groups are springing up on dozens of campuses where they add special student concerns to their activities. Professors who assume women aren't serious about careers, advisors who pressure girls toward marriage or traditional feminine jobs, would-be Negro doctors are told to be veterinarians, would-be black women told to be would-be women are told to be nurses, and faculties or administrations where few or no women are honored in authority. So she's saying they went after those institutions. In New York, which is probably the most colorful outcropping of the WLM, it got started when women supporters of men being investigated by the House of Un-American Activities Committees decided that a witch hunt should have witches and dressed up for HUAC hearings accordingly. In the words of which we are women, we are liberation, we are we. The hidden history of women's liberation began with witches and gypsies. So that's a hat operation. She said it was a witch guerrilla theater that hexed Wall Street, and later, as part of a technique called violating the reality structure, it freaked out a Wellesley alumni fundraising bridge party. Oh, I passed over something. She says, which implies the destruction of passivity, consumerism, and commodity fetishism. The routine of daily life is the theater of struggle. So she's talking about all of these white groups, and I'm trying to see that it's a part that I wanted to get to past all of this that dealt with black people. Oh, and down here, when she talks to she says, if all this sounds like far out utopian, elitist, unnecessary, or otherwise unlikely to be the next thing in revolution, consider two facts. The WLM is growing so rapidly that even its most cheerful proselytizers are surprised, spreading not only along the infrastructure of existing co-ed movement, but into the political theater where anti-Vietnam petitions have rarely been seen. There are a couple of mass movements from highly organized through just restless that the WLM might merge with, becoming a sort of revolutionary vanguard. The older middle class women come first, the ones who tried hard to play subordinate roles in the suburbs, according to the post-war baby boom women's magazine, Idol, but found something missing. Betty Friedan, who I talk about in one of my lectures, who explained the plight clearly and compassionately in the feminine mystique, named that something, rewarding work. But when these women went out to find jobs, they found a lot of home truths instead. Betty Friedan, what type of name is Friedan? brothers and sisters, y'all can answer that for me. She says, for instance, there is hardly a hierarchy in this country, business, union, government, education, religious, whatever, that doesn't discriminate against women above the secretarial level. Women with some college education earn less than men who get as far as the 8th grade. The median income of white women employed full time is less than that of white men and Negro men. Stop right there. You see what the problem is? Her problem is not that they make less than their men. She's like, we make less than our men and Negro men who ain't nobody. In essence, right? If you just really look at what she's saying we're getting this education, we're doing this stuff, and we're not being rewarded for it. And not only we're behind our own men, if that wasn't bad enough, but we're behind these Negroes, right? She said the gap between women's pay and men's pay gets greater every year, even though the number of women in the labor force increases. They are now a third of all workers. Again, this is from 1969. 43 states have protection legislation limiting the hours and places a woman can work. Legislation that is, as Governor Rockefeller admitted last year, more often protective of men. The subtler psychological punishments for stepping out of women's traditional service roles are considerable. Being called unfeminine, a bad mother, or a castrating woman, to name a traditional few. I've never actually heard that term. And to top it off, the problem of servants and childcare often proves insurmountable after others have been solved. Right? So she's naming all these things that they're an issue and they're a problem. Many of these things have been solved, with the exception, there's always a discussion about the wage gap issue. That's something I don't really want to get into, because there's a lot of data and statistics that state different things. The next paragraph says, in short, women's opportunities expanded greatly for about 15 years after they won the vote in 1920, just as Negroes had more freedom during Reconstruction before Jim Crow laws took over where slavery had left off, but they have been getting limited since. Now we get to the part where we see the constant comparison between the Black struggle for liberation and this women's concept of getting a bigger piece of the pie from their own men. We see now, I mean, as you read the article, you can see the juxtaposition of, okay, Negroes are getting free, where's ours at, right? But in that, you have the division, or the attempted division at this time, or the beginning of the division of the Black women from the Black man. Like I said, the comparison of, not only do we not make what our men make, but we don't make what their men make. And their men are oppressed, so they're lesser, so we should be greater than them, in essence. And Brother Magazine says, the white woman has always been the enigmatic bane of the Black man. Man, brother, you said it. Hold on. You know what? Can I get that on the screen? I'm just saying, I'm not the one that said it. I'm just highlighting it. And I didn't mean to put that up. Says, yep, they use a number of Black women to jump over them and Black men to get more benefits. Yeah. Let's get back to this article real quick. I think we're near the end. Oh man, she says the middle class, educated, and disillusioned group gets larger with each college graduation. The National Organization for Women, founded in 1966, the same exact year that the Panthers were founded by Betty Friedan, among others, to bring women into full participation in the mainstream of American society. Now, exercising all the privileges and responsibilities thereof in truly equal partnership with men, is a very effective voice of this group, concentrating on such reforms as getting irrelevant sexual designations out of help wanted ads and implementing equal employment opportunity laws. Y'all see how that works? So black people fighting for equal employment, and here come white women putting their 2 cents in, and that's how you get the 2-for-1 that we talked about earlier. It says if the WLM can feel solidarity with the hated middle class and vice versa, then an alliance with the second mass movement, poor women of all colors, should be no problem. They are already organized around welfare problems, free daycare centers for mothers who must work, and food prices. For them, equal pay, unequal training, and sex discrimination for jobs, not to mention the woman punishing rules of welfare, is like a daily price. Of all the families living below the poverty line, 40% are headed by women. The most interesting thing is that in all of this that she discussed, and all of these ideas that they have put out, and all of the things that they have implemented since this time, that poverty level of households headed by women is probably higher now than it was then. So with all of those things that they've pushed, that's still an issue that has not been addressed. So let me see. Says a lot of middle class and radical intellectual women are already working with the poor. And again, this is before the influx of Hispanics and so forth, so on. So when you see the poor, they talking about black people. With the poor on common problems, but viewing them as social. If the consciousness raising programs of the WLM work, they'll see them as rallying points for women. And she got a Latin term, women qua women. I'm not sure what that term means. And that might force the final revolutionary link. Rumblings are already being heard inside the Democratic Party in New York. It's the women who staff and win elections, and they may finally balk at working for only men, not very qualified men at that, in the mayoral primary. There's plenty of opposition to this kind of thinking from women as well as men. Having one's traditional role questioned is not very comfortable experience, perhaps especially for women who have been able to remain children and to benefit from work they did not and could not do. Marriage wouldn't go straight down the drain, as traditionalists keep predicting. Women's liberation might just hurry up some sort of compassionate marriage that seems to be developing anyway. Now, let's stop right there. She says if they're successful, marriage would not go straight down the drain. And yet, in this time, we're seeing marriage rates plummet. We're seeing out of wedlock births just continue to creep up, and the collapse of the family structure. So that was an outright lie. So, and that's all of the article that I'm going to go over. But, and again, you can find it if you go to the New Yorker magazine, or if you just put in if you put in the title of the article, after Black Power, after Black Power, women's liberation, you can find it and read it for yourself. But I think that knowing Gloria Steinem, knowing her history, knowing her connections, and knowing she's a hat, I think that this document made at that time was in essence, a direct declaration of war on the Black community through the attack on the Black Power movement by trying to separate the women from the men of the movement, because at that time, the women and men in the movement were the young people. And this women's movement, this feminism, was directed at the young women of the time. Right? And so we saw the different objectives that she had. We talked about how they had played out in modern society. And now we're here. We have all of this confusion. We have all this vitriol. We have all of this animosity between black men and black women. We have this talking point amongst black men that black women walked away from their families and this and this and that, which isn't really accurate, because if you were around in the 80s, you saw a lot of people were still married. There were a lot of couples that were still together. The reality is the divorces and things like that didn't really creep up until the 80s. But the brothers talk about in the 60s, the women started doing this and this and that. No, the 60s is when the attack on the minds of the women started. The reality is the destruction didn't start taking place until another thing was unleashed, which was the crack era. We never talk about the ramifications of the crack era. Not really, because we don't talk about the unleashing of crack as an attack on the black community, which it is. This was proven by Gary Webb in his Dark Alliance articles and his Dark Alliance book, right? Another discussion that we're gonna have to have one day, but the book is about 500 pages. You know what I'm saying? Really, it's a lecture in and of itself, but we never talk about it because the whole, of course, you got the whole, what comes with it is the whole mass incarceration that comes with it, and the whole changing of the dynamic of the number of black men that are available, and all the other things that went on to take place because of that, right? But this is the thing, brother. The women hadn't followed any feminism. I'll tell you like this, because it would, and the reason is because it wasn't beneficial for black women. Yeah, the hats were out there trying to talk it and start it, but it wasn't beneficial because none of the laws had been passed for the benefit of black people or women at the time. So it wasn't material to the reality of our women at the time. Remember, in 1969, the Panthers were still having shootouts with the police. So what you talking about don't add up to a hill of beans. Brothers was about to break Asada Shakur out of prison and get her out the country, right? So we were still working together. So that's the lie that's told. The women hadn't done anything. The women were still fighting. The revolution was still taking place when this article was written, which is why the article was written. That's what I'm trying to tell you. This was the declaration of war from the hats on the Black Power movement through the women on April 4th, 1969. That's the beginning of it right there. The men had declared war on the Black Power movement through FBI J. Edgar Hoover. That was the blunt force. This was the scalpel. So they were coming from two different angles, right? But the people were still united, and plus, we don't talk about it. Black people were still suffering from the trauma of the assassination of Martin Luther King. Everybody wasn't really down with listening to no white people say nothing about anything, right? And it really, if you really want to point to the time where the women really started, because it's not just enough to point out these different societal issues to a people. When you're dealing with grassroots organizing, you have to bring the react, be able to at least convince people that you can change their day-to-day reality. They couldn't say that then. It wasn't until the 80s when most of the laws had been passed and implemented, right? Because even when they were passing the laws in the 60s, a lot of this stuff didn't get implemented until the 80s. There was a lot of laws that had been passed that wasn't even implemented when I was a child. That stuff was not being implemented because I used to listen to the adults talk about it. There were still places you couldn't go, right? You see what I'm saying? So another major big time attack from the hats was when the Color Purple movie was made. And that movie, when that movie came out and the women went to see that, the perspective of how Black women saw Black men, that was a time where we really begin to see the change, right? That was the most successful anti-Black male propaganda piece ever unleashed in the Black community. There's been a lot of anti-Black male propaganda released in the white community, but the Color Purple was the first successful assault, propaganda assault, that made Black women look at Black men different, right? And this is right around the time of the crack epidemic taking place. So this is right around the time where, again, the character and the image of Black men has been assaulted in this movie. And then you start to see on the nightly news, which you had to understand at that time, the nightly news was shown to everybody, because if you had a TV, you only had one or two in the house. The news came on, everybody looked at the news, and this is when you begin to see the attack on the image of Black men on the nightly news. So every day when they show crime, they show a Black man shooting or a Black man getting shot or a Black man getting arrested, right? Regardless of what city you were in. It didn't matter if you were in New York, you were in DC, you were in Atlanta, it didn't matter. You were in LA. If the crime wasn't going on in your city, they show you the crime from New York. I remember like they would show a shooting in New York. You don't see it here now unless it's like with a quote unquote mass shooting. But at those times, somebody got shot in New York, they showed on the DC news. Right? It was hundreds of miles away. But they would show it, it's like crime is an issue. And the crime at that time was Black people, specifically Black men. So that was in the mind of people as well. And the women had just seen The Color Purple and seen, what's the name, Mr. Acting a Fool. And the idea of lesbianism was reintroduced. Right? Oh, I'm gonna get to that, brother. I'm gonna get to that. Because it very much played a role. But we're not there yet. So that is taking place in the early 80s into the mid 80s. And then the brother's question, which I'll put up, then his question comes up. And he's talking about, I don't even qualify Tupac as gangster rap, because when Tupac came out, if you listen to songs like Soldier Story and Brenda Had a Baby, and I'm talking about from his original album, Tupac was what I would call a ghetto reporter, right? But NWA, and we've talked about, Brother Jenny talked about it when he was on, Luther Campbell, which I think, that me and Brother Jenny had that discussion. Luther Campbell's influence, especially in the South, is very much underrated, right? And that influence on how men saw women and the behavior of our women, that's very much underrated. I mean, we if you weren't in the South, you didn't see it. If you went to school in the South or you lived in the South, especially in Florida, Southern Georgia, you saw the influence of Luke in the 80s and the early 90s. And Luke was he was one of the main ones pushing the sexualization of women through the music and us seeing our women as sexual objects, right? The NWA brought, as we talked about before, brought about the inward identity and defined that and what it was, and other people came and followed that. But it was the sexualization of the women and the degradation of the women. Luther Campbell was kind of basically the foundation of that. Then you would have like Too Short, who couldn't rhyme two words together without using the B word. Ice-T somewhat, and then it would go on from there. If you want to really talk about the root of the sexualization of our women, I got to lay that at Luke's doorstep. Because even though where I'm from, he wasn't. They were seen as cornballs. Like, like, get these dudes out of here. They don't have any talent. In Florida, nah, they was big. They was huge, and there was a whole movement of that type of music. I can't even remember what they called. I can't even remember what it was called, but it was a subgenre. It was like kind of a subgenre of hip hop in a way. And Luke was at the center of that. I mean, it is what it is. They had their own slang, their own dances, their own musical style, everything, right? But if you wasn't there, you ain't see it, you don't know. So that takes us up then to the 90s. And you get the Waiting to Exhales, and you get I'm trying to think what other, you start getting those movies, because there were a few of those. Yeah, I already mentioned Too Short, brother. I mentioned Too Short. And so now you have the beginnings of that discord that has become full blown now. But another aspect of it that we don't talk about is when you start having to break down the traditional family and you start having the men not in the home, you open up the opportunity for the pedophiles, right? And so many times when we hear, as men, we hear women saying they don't feel protected. What isn't being said underneath that many times is those women have been sexually violated. And that's why they don't feel protected. But it's not said publicly. But then when a brother talks about it, brings it up, don't nobody want to talk about it. The women don't want to talk about it because they get triggered. The men don't want to talk about it because a lot of times dudes got something in their background where they did something that they not really sure whether it falls into that nebulous realm where they was 20 and the girl was 17 or whatever. They like, well, I don't know. Does that fall under that? Technically, I was adult. Technically, she's underage. So they and brothers don't want to talk about it. Or they know somebody, or they have been violated, right? So when you bring up the sexual abuse issue, nobody wants to talk about it. But a part of the underlying issue between black men and black women, that is a part of it that we don't want to discuss. But it is a major part of the problem, right? This is a fact. We have, I mean, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. We have rapists and pedophiles running rampant in the community, not suffering any street justice. This is just a fact. I mean, we got people in our community getting killed for all types of stuff. Most of the time for no reason whatsoever. But when it's time to kill people who are, serve no positive purpose in the community, people walking around scot-free. I mean, we got thousands of sisters missing. Sometimes it's by people outside the community, like the guy in what was it in Missouri. But in reality, we got people in our community doing this stuff because that's the new way of making money. But we don't want to talk about it. And the brother said, let me put that up, brother, because this is 100% right and exact. Said the boys getting sexually violated too, which creates these homophobes decide against black men. Absolutely. And what we don't want to talk about is a lot of times that culture of sexual violation gets cultivated in the prison system, and then it's brought out of the prison system and brought into the street and brought into the community because it's seen as a form of domination. And that idea of dominate or be dominated comes right out with the people. And the sexual aspect of it comes right out with the people. And instead of it being, okay, I'm not going to openly out here sexually violate this man, I'm going to get with this woman and try to get with her and try to get my mind right. But then the assault happens on the children. But again, we don't want to talk about it. Right? But then when the sisters say, I don't feel safe, underlying that, like I said, is the sexual violation that had already taken place. Because almost every sister, if she hasn't suffered, she knows somebody that has. And when I first started really like seeing that this was an issue and talking about it and stuff, you can see sisters tense up when you just missing the word. You can almost see them sometimes having flashbacks. I remember one time I was talking with a sister. I had seen her on Instagram. I saw her somewhere. I asked if this was her. We started talking. I was telling her about the work we do in the community, blah, 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 blah. And I brought up sexual abuse, and she kind of froze for a second. I was like, oh, man, I didn't know. And like, it ruined the whole conversation and made everything tense. And it's just like, I didn't know. I didn't. Sometimes I can see it. I didn't see it. Like sometimes I can look and I can tell, but I didn't see it. But that's how pervasive it's becoming our community. Right? But when we have these discussions between black men and black women, we don't discuss that. When we have these discussions between black men and black women, we don't look at these historical documents. Right? When we play the blame game, we never blame the hats. We blame each other. And there's enough blame to go around, but the root starts with the enemy. 9 times out of 10, when you see a problem in the black community in America, the hats are at the root of it, and the hats are the ones benefiting from it. But the hats are never brought up in the discussion, which I realize, as the ancestors say many times to me, that's your job. You don't see anybody doing it, that's your job. Which I will admit there are times when I would just like someone else to do it. It's times when I would like to start to say something, and y'all like, hey, brother so and so covered that and took care of that already, man. We got to understand it, and we already rolled it out on it. You late. I'll be like, oh, I appreciate that. I'm going to cut the mic off. Right? But that doesn't happen very often, which is why I felt like I had to bring this document up. And I had to analyze it and put it before the people so they could get an understanding of the root of this modern conflict that we have internally. And I mean, when you talk about the hat hop, now it's gotten to the point where the women are just as vile and despicable and self-degrading as the male rappers were with and are with the with just all the vile, disgusting lyrics that we have that just point to us killing each other, which seems to be the only thing. You know what I'm saying? It seems to be the only thing that most of the rap is talking about. If it's not partying and materialism, just killing each other. And brothers, Maggin says, whenever someone tells you to ignore the originator of your issue and focus on something else, walk the hell away from that individual. Hey, brother, look, I'm gonna keep it 100. I'm gonna say it like this: anybody who, in today's time, now that more black people than ever have been made to think about the hats due to Ye and Ree and that whole how they were greetings to Unique One Express, how they helped bring that whole thing to light and how the hats attacked them, proving the point. Anybody who tries to tell you to ignore the hats is either a coward or they're working for the hats. Point blank, period. Anybody. I don't care who they are. If they tell you to ignore the hats in this day and time, they're either a coward or they're working for the hats. Those are the only, you can't even be ignorant anymore because the whole Ye and Kyrie thing has put the whole thing on Front Street and made everybody re-examine. So, you know, I just state that publicly. People can do with it what it will. You can examine whoever you want within the confines of that. Because here's the thing. For decades, or really centuries, we've been fighting for freedom/liberation. Today, unfortunately, that's the last battle. And what I mean by the last battle is not the last as in first and last, but last as in we move past that. We have to now think in terms of African/Black survival because the goal has changed. Because the people in charge have changed. Whites, regular whites, are comfortable with domination. Right? They ain't comfortable with sharing power, but they're comfortable with domination. If they're in a position where they can exercise domination, they're straight. They're comfortable with that. They'll only think about extermination if it gets to a point where they feel like people are a threat. But usually the price of trying to do extermination is too high, and it's one that they don't want to play. The Hat's goal is mass extermination of black, white, red, yellow, whoever, because they don't consider themselves white. So they don't care. This is why you got Chuck Schumer up there, right? I don't know if y'all saw this. I didn't bring it up. But Chuck Schumer say, "Oh, we need more immigrants because the population isn't reproducing itself." Whose population isn't reproducing itself? The black population is steady. The Hispanic population is going up, obviously, because he just said that they're going to open the gates for more immigration. The other populations, statistically, numerically, aren't really relevant. So only the white population isn't reproducing itself. And why isn't the white population not reproducing itself? Partially because they swallowed the feminism from the Hats and suffer the repercussions even more so than we have. And two, they're not genetically as strong as far as reproduction goes. So they're suffering the repercussions of it because their women are having children later. A segment of our women are having children later, especially in the last few years, but largely our women have been having children earlier. We just having a breakdown of society, and we have all the asymmetrical family groups that we've tried to piece back together. And brother says everybody is against us, not just the Hats. That's not the point, brother. The Hats are the ones in control. So everybody being against us is irrelevant. We already know that. That's always been the case. But the Hats have never had the full global control that they have now. Think about it. Just in case everyone has forgotten, it was the Hats who stopped the global economy with the press of a button. The global economy. It wasn't just the Western countries. China, Russia, all of Europe, America, Mexico, Canada, most of the countries in South America, many of the countries in Africa. That no one else has that power but the Hats. I was talking to a brother, I was like, when people want to talk about, for example, reparations, you say, all right, hey man, we're gonna fight for reparations. The Hats control the global economy. The Hats control the central bank. Any discussion about reparations that don't include the Hats, you ain't discussing reparations because they control the money. They control the concept of money. They're behind the digital dollar concept that's about to be implemented by President Biden. If you watch the World Economic Forum, they were discussing that, and at that time it was about 2 a.m. when I watched it. I don't know what time it was over there. They were discussing that then. If you read Klaus Schwab's book, he was talking about it in the Great Reset book. Next thing I know, as soon as I got halfway through the book, Biden was talking about the digital dollar. At the same time, these crypto exchanges are collapsing, that the Hats are collapsing because they were taking the money and sending it over to Ukraine, which the dude in Ukraine said he wants to make a greater Israel. So whenever you find anything going on, it's a Hat underneath there. Just like the New York subway. You go on the New York subway, there's going to be a rat there somewhere. Plain and simple. You said, well, only focus on one people. Nobody, other people we're not worried about people getting rich. We're worried about surviving. Maybe you missed that part. We're not fighting. The days of fighting oppression are over. The day is here to avoid and reverse genocide. This isn't an oppression discussion. Oppression is over. This is a genocide discussion. The genocide plan's already been implemented. The minute they unleashed that bioweapon that we call the Fauci, and then convinced people to take the second bioweapon that we call the jab, the genocide was on. When you see people like Irene Cara and DMX and all these various people sitting around one day talking, and then next thing you know, their obituaries up and everybody looking around, and then what do we always find out? We find somewhere a social media post or something about them saying that they took the jab, and now, whether it's 3 weeks later or a month later or a year later, that person is in the ground. That's a hat operation. So the first step is keeping Black people alive. That's where we at now. When you see Bill Gates buying up farmland so you can't even eat proper food, he's implementing a hat operation underneath Klaus Schwab's agenda, who is a servant of the hats because he was taught by, among others, Henry Kissinger. And Brother I. Allen said, hold up, did I miss it? Oh, my bad. Well, it won't even let me show this, brother. Hold on. I guess YouTube is like, no, sir. Anyway, brother said Washington Post recently admitted that those who get the Fauci outnumber the jab when it comes to C-19 deaths. I was going to put that on the screen, but YouTube apparently is like, yeah, not putting that on the screen. But yeah, that's a Washington Post article. In fact, I need to do a radical report on it. Because okay, brothers and sisters, I'm back. Can y'all hear me? And don't ask me what happened. So y'all put a 1 if y'all can hear me. Okay. All right. So obviously, I don't know what happened. I've never had that issue before. So all of the things that I had, the information that I had up with because I was about to go back over, and Brother Jesseline said we went from being the hero Heru on the planet to the enemy of the planet because of the hats. Indeed. So I'm going to put up this Chancellor Williams information again before I close out, because, hey, I'm going to just say this. If this has never happened before, and it didn't happen until we started talking about the hats and the Fauci. That could be a coincidence, or it might not be a coincidence. Either way. So, again, and when I get the official flyer, it'll be put out on YouTube, Instagram. It'll be sent out in those of you that are in our Telegram communities. It'll be put out, and all the information will be put out there when I get the official flyer. Excuse me. In the meantime, the 6th annual Dr. Chancellor Williams Day celebration will be The gravesite ceremony will be December 24th, 2022 at high noon. It will be at Lincoln Memorial Cemetery. That's 4001 Suitland Road, Suitland, Maryland, Section O, Lot 618, Grave 5. And then a week after that, the Africa versus Everybody lecture will be December 31st, 2022, New Year's Eve, 6490 Landover Road, Cheverly, Maryland, 20785. Tickets for that event will be $20. Also, and I forgot to mention this is the first of a 6-part lecture series. Dr. Chancellor Williams Day, Dr. Collett Day in January. We're going to do Memorandum 46 Exposed in February. And then March, we're going to do Dr. Francis Cress Welsing Day. And then in April, we're going to do the N-word identity. And then lastly, in May, we're going to do the State of the Race for African Liberation Day. So what you will be able to do when the tickets become available, instead of buying each individual ticket for $20, you will be able to buy the entire lecture series, the live streams, for $100 even. You will also get an edited digital copy of probably either the Dr. Collett lecture from last year or the Dr. Francis Cress Welsing lecture from last year. Free with that purchase. So not only do you get a discount on all the lectures, but you also get one of the lectures free to keep and spread to your friends and family. So with that, brothers and sisters, I thank you all for listening. I thank you all for liking, sharing, subscribing. I thank you all for all your support for myself, Brother Jenny, Straight Black Pride Movement. Again, this is The Center Live. You can follow me on Instagram at dc.radical1, on Twitter at dc_radical_ONE, OTW2 with DC Radical 1. The Cash App is $DC Radical 1. Of course, this is the YouTube, and the email is dc.radical_1 at protonmail.com. We also, real quick, did y'all enjoy the clips from the larger live streams? Because that's something I think I'm gonna go back and do, and look at some of the older live streams and release clips from that. If y'all enjoy that, y'all can again put a 1 in the chat. And if so, I'll continue to do that. There's a couple more clips from Brother Jenny's appearance a couple of weeks ago that I want to put in. And then there's some old stuff from some of my other live streams, like the live stream where I talked about the Great Reset, that I also would like to do. So I noticed other people on YouTube where they I was like, how are they getting so much content? Then I realized, oh, they're chopping up some of that old stuff and putting it in along the way. I was like, hey, that's smart. So look out for that. And I think I just make a separate section on the YouTube channel where all those will be listed. And also look out for a couple more radical reports during the week. I want to talk about the Kansas City, the situation where the sisters were kidnapped and the police didn't believe them. I definitely want to talk about that. I don't think that got a lot of coverage, and I want to connect that to a situation where they found out that the human trafficking was being done by the police. So you can see how these two seemingly non-related cases are related in our as far as our community goes. And Brother Magazil says, hey, we still got some people that could smash the like button. And again, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Look out for those clips coming this week. And yeah, maybe I'll talk about something other than the hats because I have no idea what happened. You know, I've seen people get cut off on their YouTube shows, and I was like, oh, wow. You know, I guess I should have expected it eventually. But either way, we're going to continue to do the work. I appreciate everybody for your support. And more than likely, I'm going to see you all next week. With that, I say a BB for Odie and straight black pride.